You're here for HebrewInIsrael.net, and first I want to wish everyone a very happy and festive Chag HaMatzot, and I hope you've been enjoying the past couple of days. It's been very, very quiet in the internet world, at least for me, and I decided to come out and just quickly talk about keeping Chag HaMatzot, and specifically Korban Pesach in antiquity. So what's very, very interesting about this subject is that we actually have, to this very day, a community that actually does Korban Pesach, which is the Samaritan community. And actually, just now in the news, there was this whole thing about a Palestinian delegation meeting up with the Samaritans, as they've always had. Actually, not always, but the past couple of decades, they've had actually pretty good relationship with the Samaritan community, and they were invited because a lot of the Samaritans actually work down in Shechem, and apparently because there was a Jewish representative there, they got up and left. But in any case, what's very interesting here is the fact that the Samaritan community for the past 2,000 years has actually been doing, actually more than 2,000 years, actually been doing a Korban Pesach, a Passover sacrifice, which is the only sacrifice they actually do to this very day on Mount Gerizim. And actually, a couple of years back, I think it was around 2014, 2013, I actually had a meeting with Binyamin Tzedakah, who is really one of the more the historians one of the historians they have in their community, and he actually just published a book about Samaritan history. And he kind of gave me a description of the past couple decades, because he's actually an elderly gentleman, and he gave me a description of the past couple decades of what they've been doing. One of the interesting things he pointed out to how they practice the Korban Pesach is the fact that when there were many, many of them, when they were standing one year of about 1 million something before they were massacred. And I mentioned earlier, this past couple of decades has been in good relationship with the Palestinians. It hasn't always been like this. One of the reasons they're a very, very small number is because they were actually massacred. One of the greatest genocides, historical genocides ever to happen that we can record, is actually the murder of the Samaritan community. And they were reduced they assumed close to 1 million people to only several families. I mean, they've only been recovering the last couple of 100 and something years. They were massacred by the Turks, and there were several cases, but this was the main one. And they're a very, very small community today. It's only about less than 800 people, if I'm not mistaken. And they actually do a Korban Pesach to this very day on Mount Gerizim. I've actually, by mistake, arrived there when they did the Korban Pesach back. I think it was in 2002, I want to say. It actually happened to be on a Friday, and they usually do, when it's on Friday, when it's on Erev Shabbat, they actually meet up way before. So when they do the cooking and all this, the entire ceremony doesn't flow into Shabbat. Only during Shabbat they only do the eating. Their entire system is very interesting because they actually do treat it like a sacrifice. For example, they have altars. Now, one of the things that Tzedakah actually pointed out to me was the fact that they found all these Samaritan altars all over the mountain, which is very interesting. It meant that when there were many of them, they would they would basically spread out from the area of the actual temple itself, or the temple site that they have, and do it all over the place. Basically, as long as it's on Mount Gerizim. So they actually discovered all these sacrificial pits. And I say pits because we're all used to the idea of the altar being an uprisen structure. For them, they actually dig a pit in the ground, and then they put like a grill bar on top, and they burn whatever they have to burn on that grill bar. What's very interesting about this as well is the fact that they actually probably represent a more historical way of how the Pesach was done by the entire community, everyone doing everything together, the slaughtering done by everyone while singing, and roasting them in ovens until the middle of the night, and only then they start eating. And there were people that each family gathered together on one animal, so there were people who knew each broiling pit belonged to which families, and they'll cut off pieces, and then people would arrive at the doorsteps with these large bowls with the pieces of meat for the family. And there are a lot of interesting stories that Tzedakah actually has to tell about cases in the past, like for example when they were blocked from 1960 1947, I think, no, from 1948 to 1967, a lot of the Samaritans could not actually go to Mount Gerizim, and there was a whole diplomatic thing with the Jordanians and so on, and a lot of interesting stories that he told me. So this is a very, very interesting piece of history, because there are a community that's been around from the Second Temple period, actually from the First Temple period, but they're temples from the Second Temple, and they continue practicing this very day. It's really the only group that continues doing any types of sacrifices to this very day to the God of Israel. But what's very interesting, something that most people don't know, is that the Ethiopian Jews, we can call them Jews, for the sake of the fact that they actually say they're from the tribe of Dan, the Ethiopian Jews actually used to practice a Pesach as well. I actually have a book here written by Sharon Shalom. It's called From Cyanide to Ethiopia, a very interesting little book, written by an Ethiopian Jew for the Ethiopian community, of how they're supposed to keep Torah today in the land of Israel, the fact that they live as a minority group that actually is not what we can call mainstream Judaism. And one of the things he mentions is that they actually did do a Korban Pesach in the synagogues, and the what they call the masjid, which basically means a house of prayer. But they would actually have a case who functioned as a Kohen, slaughter the animal, and they actually had like a little altar in the back of the synagogue, and they would sprinkle blood, and they would then pieces that would roast, and pieces of it were given to the different members of the community. So in the land of Israel we have the Samaritans, but in Ethiopia the community there, apparently, I don't know if everyone did, but the certain parts of the community actually did do a Korban Pesach for a very, very long time. But when they came to Israel, and this actually might have been stopped even earlier, but when they came to Israel it was stopped. I mean, I remember the first waves, the big waves of Ethiopian Jews who came here. We actually, it was as a child, we met them literally days after they came off the plane, even before they even knew any Hebrew or anything. And they came here, and they basically stopped doing it because of the fact that today mainstream Judaism does not do sacrifices outside of the temple. And, but they still keep a lot of their traditions and practices this very day. So, for example, they actually have celebrations of biblical feasts that don't necessarily fall in the same days as the rabbinic calendar, not in the sense of like a day because of the moon sighting, but actually because of a different calculation. For example, when is Machorat HaShabbat and things like that. So it's a very interesting thing to see these living, breathing historical groups which are keeping Torah differently than mainstream Judaism, and actually seeing echoes from the past come to life to this very day. In any case, very short video, quick subject about Pesach, about Chag HaMatzot today, and I hope you're enjoying your Chag HaMatzot, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the feast, a wonderful 7th day of the feast, and in general, a wonderful day and week. Kol Tov.